So, today I'm going to talk about the background to what we call now modern postural yoga, the tradition that started maybe the start of the 20th century really, or probably really with Vivekananda coming over for the Chicago Parliament. In 1893 he spoke at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago, and he really was probably the first person to bring the Indian traditions over to the West and make them palatable to the West. So subsequent to that, this is what we've been finding as yoga and Indian philosophy, let's say, catches the boat over from India and exits India. It becomes a different thing, or its roots grow, it evolves. Just like anything grows and evolves, yoga also grows and evolves. So how does it do that, and who are the players on the stage? Today I'm going to explain very basically some of the main players and what they did. So first I mentioned Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, born Narendra Datta. I'm no good with the pronunciations, I'm afraid. He lived in 1863 to 1902. He lived a short life. Health complaints since he was young, and nevertheless he made a huge impact on the world. He spoke so charismatically in the world parliaments, which wasn't really their plan. Their plan was to show that basically all religions shared somewhat in Christianity, and to kind of big up Christianity really. And he stole the show. Instead, it was the other way around. He showed that all religions actually found their place within the Indian perspective, right? So he was a Hindu monk, a philosopher, and an author, and he was the disciple of the 19th century mystic Sri Ramakrishna from Calcutta. So this mystic, Ramakrishna, was a tantric mystic, a very interesting life, and Vivekananda was one of his favourite pupils. Right? Came over to Chicago, spread a kind of what is called now a neo-Hindu doctrine, which means a kind of non-sectarian version of it. It wasn't so religious, there wasn't so much of perhaps a Indian flavour to it. He made it relatable to everyone. He made it relatable to Westerners. He took out a lot of the more devotional aspects and put in a more Advaita, non-dual ideas, that everything is one. And Emerson and Thoreau and what's called the transcendentalist movement at the time in the late 1800s in the US were very much inspired Vivekananda in what he did, and he kind of converted Hinduism into a palatable kind of message to the West, which was, let's say, slightly different to the original flavour, but it worked, in as much as he found huge popularity. And subsequent to that, a kind of New Age movement really grows up, and yoga has undoubtedly been influenced by this New Age kind of Advaita, everything is part of the whole, and a kind of let's say watered down version of religion, which can be more rigid and more prescriptive. And Vivekananda really wanted to show that anyone could reach these states, that all you need to do is meditate, fix your mind on a point of oneness, and anyone can attain the same kind of union with the eternal spirit. Right? So this flavour penetrates yoga, and it's worth considering that when we come to the yoga, we now find a modern postural yoga practice that's completely stripped of its original origins, which were much more religiously defined usually. That there was a devotional aspect quite often to yoga. There were certain aims which were contextualized within a metaphysical perspective, and now we find a non-sectarian practice that anyone can practice to kind of come deeper into themselves and get an idea of this kind of universal consciousness. So this is where these kind of looser flavours come from, probably. They start at least with Vivekananda, who did a service, but also in some ways changing certain things, some might say a slight disservice to the original material. So after that, I'd like to consider Paramahamsa Madhyavasi. Now Madhyavasi, completely unknown yogi, but seminal in his inspiration of inspiring two fundamental disciples, Yogendra, Shri Yogendra, and Kuvali Ananda, who founded the Lonavala Yoga Institute at Kuvali Ananda in Mumbai. Both, in fact, lived in Mumbai. And Paramahamsa Madhyavasi, he was pretty much a secret kind of classic kind of yogi who lived in the Himalayas for most of his life. I think almost 80 years. He gave up. He had a place in as some kind of judge or court legality within Calcutta, and he just gave everything up. And he went to the Himalayas, and I think he stayed there for almost 80 years. And then latterly, he came to the banks of, I can't exactly remember where his ashram was, sure someone will remind me, and he set up an ashram there when he was very old, in fact, caused, I think, over 80. He didn't spend 80 years in the Himalayas. He was over 80 when he set up the ashram. And there, he, not there, but he taught Kuvali Ananda and Shri Yogendra. And they've had a massive impact on the subsequent unfoldment of yoga. Shri Yogendra is probably the first modern yoga teacher. He's the guy who came over he was in New York, and he also set up classes in Mumbai. Again, turn of the century. And he really kind of gave yoga a popular slant. He allowed general public into his classes. He charged them for it, and this is the first time that yoga was used as a kind of dip in and out of practice. Previous to that, it was done by swamis, by yogis, given therapeutically sometimes, but always the test was on the student, and the fee was by donation at the end, and it was one-on-one, and it was a very selective process. And now Yogendra was opening up classes in a suburb of Mumbai and allowing anyone to come. It was a general class, and the goals were very much different. The goal wasn't yoga with a capital Y anymore. It was a little bit more peace of mind, recreational, participation in a group activity, which obviously wasn't there when the one-on-one training, It was a different thing. And he was really the kind of primary disciple of Madhyavasi, because he changed everything in that sphere. He brought yoga to the popular mindset. Now, the other character on the scene who I mentioned, the disciple of Madhyavasi, is Kuvali Ananda. Now, Kuvali Ananda had a scientific mind. He was of a kind of innovative, modern spirit who very much wanted to kind of authenticate, just like Vivekananda wanted to authenticate Hinduism by pinning it to Western ideas. We also find that same spirit in Kuvali Ananda, who wanted to kind of pin yoga to Western science, basically, and authenticate it, validate it from experiments. And he was prolific in the experiments he conducted, trying to find conclusive results for the effect that yoga had, particularly on the endocrine system, really, particularly on the glands of the body that secrete the hormones to govern the body. So he was a prodigious modernizer, and he really kind of contextualized yoga in the way we currently see it as well, in a way, because now we see it therapeutically, we see it as something that we can use for the sake of the body, and this is a new thing. This has to be recognized as a new thing at the time. Previous to that, yoga was used for soteriological purposes, for discovering the spirit, and now we find Kuvali Ananda talking about, therapy, talking about the material body and making the material body the focus. So it's a different thing again, and yoga had taken another step in its evolutionary ladder. Doesn't mean at the same time that other things aren't happening as well, that we still don't have ascetics practicing and teaching yoga as asceticism, or tantrikas practicing yoga as a way of developing power in the world and kind of supercharging the body. We have all this going on. Bhakti yogis practicing yoga for the sake of devotion to God, though they want a relationship with God. We have all this going on as well. But we have these particular strands that are specifically linked, let's say, to the development of modern postural yoga, as it is, right? So now we find modern postural yoga being taught in wide and general ranging classes, with the focus on mainly, first of all, the body and healing the body and comforting the body. And there's no test, there's no quiz on the door as to when you can come in or not, right? There's no commitment generally to a guru, really. The teacher is now a yoga teacher, a paid staff member, as it were. Well, maybe something more, but nevertheless, not the guru, but a paid service provider, let's say. And we're doing, something quite different. And these are the kind of characters who brought yoga into the and assumed it into the modern age, as well as Shivananda, who obviously did a similar thing, for example, on the banks of the Rishikesh, where his ashram was, who allowed everyone to contact the benefits of yoga, but to which end, just as Vivekananda kind of took the edges off some of the more rigid and particular doctrine that he came over with, the same with Shivananda, just kind of softens the edges of yoga a bit to make it inclusive so that everyone can do it. And surely that's the idea. So we can't really begrudge them for, if we want to say, watering down the practice, because now everyone gets a taste of it and it's accessible to everyone and everyone can get the benefit. So I'd say these characters still have to be lauded. Another individual on the scene is Sri Sundaram, right? Sitharaman Sundaram. Sundaram was a lawyer all his life. He was also, on the side, a committed yoga practitioner and teacher, and he was the first to publish particularly a handbook of postural yoga with pictures. So he predates yoga Iyengar by quite a way, in fact. And this again was a popularization, a populist endeavour to bring yoga to the public and to suggest that these postures actually had effects on the physical body that you would do for the sake of exercise, right? For the sake of developing good health on a physical level. So Sundaram, Sri Sundaram, is another character who was incredibly important now. I mean, we don't see it anymore. Iyengar and others have built on this 100-fold now, but previous to that, there were no books or no instruction manuals of yoga, because yoga was a secret thing to be taught to the initiated only, and its doctrines were esoteric and its focuses were transcendental. But now we see yoga being reined in and disseminated widely, right? And quite loosely, quite, let's say, democratically. Finally, we have Krishna Macharia. Now, I'm not going to say so much perhaps today about Krishna Macharia, but obviously Krishna Macharia further widened that net of disseminating yoga to the masses through his main disciples, which were his son, TKV Desikachar, the Ashtanga yoga of Pattabhi Jois, and BKS Iyengar, who I've just mentioned. BKS Iyengar was, for a short time, the disciple also of Krishna Macharia. They all came with different yogic interpretations of Krishna Macaria's teachings. Pattabhi Jois always claimed to have the original interpretation. Iyengar never, in fact, claimed to be teaching the exact method of Krishna Macharia. He developed his own method. TKV Desikachar was teaching the way his father taught later in life. Right? Anyway, Krishna Macharia really is the character who, through these disciples again, brings yoga, modern postural yoga that is, to the West and to the modern world through, first and foremost, Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois. Right? He teaches a very physical yoga that's not, although he calls it Ashtanga yoga and kind of pins it loosely to the Yoga Sutras, again, it's really flavourless in terms of religious connotations. It's physically minded and it becomes incredibly popular, basically. He also is possibly, not, I wouldn't say accused or he's possibly took a number of associations from other disciplines as well. So it's said that he maybe took some interest in Kuvali Ananda's studies of scientific experiments on yoga, but more likely he took more influence from a bodybuilder down the road, down the hall of Mysore Palace, where he was teaching. V.K. Iyer was also employed by the Mysore Palace, but unlike Krishna Macharia, who was employed for yoga, Iyer was employed for gymnastics and bodybuilding, and he happened to have his gymnasium just down the hall from Krishna Macaria's yoga school, his yoga shala. So it's quite highly likely that Krishna Macharia may have seen and been inspired by a number of things going on down the hall, as well as that other influences may have influenced his teaching. There were modern circuses coming through quite a lot, because a number of the postures that Krishna Macharia teaches, many of them in fact have no previous record or precedent whatsoever, so he must have got them from somewhere. Of course, Krishna Macharia originally claimed in his book Yoga Makaranda that he got them from the Yoga Karunta, but latterly no one has come forward to authenticate this claim, and other books have been suggested that he may have been influenced by. The Shri Tattva Nidhi, which is in the Mysore Palace, which Norman Soyman has done a fantastic job, as well as Jason Birch, in bringing to light this text, gives a number of photographs and documents the practice that doesn't look a million miles away, and also gives instructions for vinyasa, which is a new thing as well, and starts really with Pattabhi Jois. Previous to that, there's no clear instruction, sorry, not Pattabhi Jois, Krishna Macharia, there's no clear instruction on the sequencing of postures and how you move in and out of it. Previous to that, postures are more statically held. There really isn't such a movement-based, or at least a methodical movement-based interpretation, although it is true that Yogendra did advise movement in the posture, he didn't really specify so in such detail as Krishna Macharia did. So there's other precedents that flow into the river of Krishna Macharia when he comes forth and teaches this yoga that really is the bedrock of our Western currents, or at least non-Indian modern postural yoga that we've developed. Now, it has this flavour that is really a melange. It really is a whole kind of synthesization of a huge number of influences on that all kind of, I suppose, well up in the end, all find their conclusion in Krishna Macharia and then beyond. But he probably is the person who put them all together, as I said, with other influences as well as the previous ones that I mentioned. And this is where we probably end our story today, although there's been some modernization even of these yogas we find, the Iyengar, Vinaya Yoga of Desikachar and Ashtanga Yoga of Pattabhi Jois, have even been modified further, but probably not half so much as the modernization that came up to that point. We find Vinyasa, for example, being a slight hybrid of Ashtanga, for example, or the more therapeutic-based Yin Yoga, etc., being not a million miles away from the individual therapeutically based Vinaya Yoga of Desikachar, right? But nevertheless, most of the foundations have been set up to the point of Krishna Macharia. So, where are we going next? Who knows? Please write in the comments what you think and what you think our trajectory will be into the future, the next step of modern posture yoga. Will it become more posturally orientated, or will it go back to being more inclusive and dredge up its original roots in Tantra, and become more kind of holistically grounded in pre-modern classical scriptural precedent? Let me know in the comments, and as always, subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.